basically he commissioned the master plan. So it took 200 years to build that city, but you can see the power of a master plan for a city that if you get that framework right, the city can grow faster and become more sustainable in its original objectives. So that's really what we're saying is we think that linear city and the master plan approach is something that the line is really anchored in. The second thing is it becomes a vertical city. And you staying on the Manhattan analogy here, as I said to you before, Manhattan's 3 kilometres wide. The line is 1.2 kilometres wide. The only difference is we fold it up. So we take the grid of Manhattan, and I'll explain the grid to you in a minute, but effectively we fold that up. What you see here is the blue lines are the avenues. For those people who've been in Manhattan, 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue, 7th Avenue. Those avenues get folded up into the air. The red are the streets, and we form a grid. So the line is effectively two structures that fold up and look at each other. They look into each other. The line is not a building. It is a city, and it's a city framework. And so, as I said, you pick up the grid structure of Manhattan. And what that means is when you get into the line, you will have 5th Avenue at ground level, 6th Avenue at 150 metres in the air, 7th Avenue at 250, 8th Avenue at 350, and so forth. Those avenues are what we call primary decks. Inside those primary decks, to give you a sense of space, I think this must be, 2.7 high. The primary deck is 16 metres thick. 16 metres. Inside that primary deck, we house all our transport, infrastructure, and everything sits in that primary deck. On top of that primary deck is effectively a boulevard, and they sit either side. And those boulevards run for kilometres long, and they're roughly 50 metres wide. And so those boulevards carry the transport, and we'll talk about the logistics. But you move along the blue corridors in the city. They become big boulevards. And you use your vertical rapid transportation that kind of sits in as the red. So you will move around the line in the same grid structure you move around New York City. You will be able to say, I want to go to this point, to that point on the northern side or the western side, and there'll be a whole geospatial map, but effectively it is a grid structure. Another way to think about it is think about it as a bookcase, pigeonholes. What we're doing is we're creating a pigeonhole bookcase, and then the real estate sits in around that bookcase. But there's a framework, we call it the chassis. That's what you basically see. Two structures that look inside and form a canyon in the middle. What that enables us to do is to create a very vibrant city. Again, stay on the Manhattan side. If you're living on the east side of Manhattan and want to go to Madison Square Garden, it's roughly a, 2-kilometre walk. By the time we fold that up, you've now created a third dimension because you can actually access things both horizontally, vertically, and crosswise. So your travel times are exponentially improved and your connectivity is exponentially improved. And it's almost like a bit like a black hole that you've seen, Inception or whatever, when they fold the paper, put the pen through. What we're doing is we're creating a different dimension around connectivity. What that means is there's vibrancy that sits in this city. And I'll show you some of the pictures a little bit later on, some of the renderings. And it means that basically it's anchored in things like a 5-minute walk, that you can get all your daily needs within 5 minutes. So the outcome of that is, you can see the size here, that's Greater London, that's the line, and the outcome in terms of impact on the land and impact on the environment is very different. We're using less than 10% of the land than you do in traditional cities. So we're actually, by taking it vertical, we're taking the strain away from the infrastructure on the land. What that also enables you to do is to connect with the land. So if we go back to that Manhattan thing I said before, I love Manhattan, it's fantastic, it's a great grid system. But to build Manhattan, they had to kill every bit of vegetation on that island and then replace it in with a park. What we're doing is by building the line, we're actually creating a city inside a park as opposed to a city with a park, because the park is actually sit at the base and the landscapes sit at the base and it's accessible by everybody. When you live in the line, you'll be able to come down anytime you want to, no different than any high-rise building in the world. You'll come down and hit the landscapes and be able to use that. So living in the line is as much about the outdoors and the landscapes and the connectivity as it is about the structure that you live in. How the line is put together, it's built in phases and modules. Roughly, the height of the line is 500 metres above sea level. And that stays constant as it rises into the mountains and comes out at the top of the mountains. What that means is the structure itself gets smaller as we move in, but the height stays perfectly at 500 metres of sea level. What we do is we build it in modules. And the creation of a module and the framework, the chassis I spoke to you before, enables a that's it. Enables us to replicate it. And therefore we get some economies of scale and we basically drive some efficiencies, as opposed to a normal city that basically is always reinventing itself and having to reinvent and put in new infrastructure. Our ability to leverage that infrastructure is heightened by the line. The marina is where we're basically starting, in the hidden marina. That is our phase one. There were talks about, the lines getting smaller. It used to be, a big line, now it's a dash. It was always going to be built in phases and stages. No one ever anticipated you're building a city for 9 million people in one hit. So we are building this, and this is effectively an aerial of what it looks like over the top of the line. Comes down into a hidden marina, and this is where we're starting. We're building a hidden harbour that comes in. Around that harbour, which will be marine base, we'll have roughly 4 million square metres of space that will actually formed and part of the landscapes, and they'll be at the gardens of the line. The first phase is going to consist of 3 modules. Roughly that will be about 21 to 22 million square metres inside the line. Put that in perspective, the Burj Khalifa has a GFA roughly of about 350,000 square metres. We're going to be 21 million. So it is enormous. It will house somewhere between 200 to 250,000 people this first phase. So we are building a city, and it will be full of everything. It's full of schools, places of worship, fire stations, justice system courts. It's full of retail, commercial, residential. It's got hospitals, it's got universities. It is a full-blown city. And so it's an incredible initiative. Again, to put that into perspective, staying on the Manhattan, each module, the distance between Columbus Circle and Fifth Avenue in New York City is 900 metres. So anybody who's gone to Central Park South, walk that, that's 900 metres. One module is 800 metres long, so it's almost the distance of the Central Park South. And it's 500 high. In my prior life, I built this building here, which is called One Central Park, and it's 470 metres high. We're going to be 500 metres high. And effectively what we're doing, as I said to you before, is we build 2 structures side by side. They look into each other and form a canyon. And so the glass becomes almost the city walls, and the city sits inside the glass. If you then outlay that, the 3 modules effectively take you from the Arc de Triomphe into the start of the Louvre in terms of size. It is enormous. By any stretch of the imagination, this is the most audacious, ambitious thing that's ever been done. And it's incredible, and we're underway. We're into construction. The line will have a series of anchor assets like all cities, and again, I could provide a lot more information, but I don't want to bore everybody. But we built the city around having anchor assets, no different than when you go to Paris and you have the Arc de Triomphe, or you have the Louvre as an anchor asset, or if you go to London, or if you go to New York City, you've got the Met Museum. We have the city anchored with these large-scale anchor assets and city-making, place-making assets. For example, it's been very public. The line and NEOM have been selected as part of the 2034 FIFA Games. We will be building a stadium here that starts at level 350 in the air. That is the height of the Empire State Building, is where the playing pitch will be. And this stadium will be like nothing you have ever seen. It'll hold 45,000 people, and it will be incredible. And we're well into design, and everyone says, can you build it? Absolutely, we can build it, and we will build it. To put into some sort of scale, we're building things like arenas here. Our arena here will be roughly the size of Madison Square Garden from the get-go. So these are big anchor assets that will anchor the city and give place and purpose. As I said, we're not building a building, we're building a city. Put that into context, again, just overlay some global assets onto that. The first thing that probably jumps out here is the Eiffel Tower. So our chandelier that sits under the stadium is roughly 2/3 the size of the Eiffel Tower. We're just going to be bringing it down as opposed to bringing it up as our centre point of the city. You can see, Tower Bridge there that sits in our gate and the size of that, and the gate is enormous. The gate here is the width of the Thames, to put that in perspective. I think we get lost when we look at the line and try to explain it to people. They get lost in the dimensions. And as I said to you, if I leave you with nothing, this is an incredible initiative and it's been like nothing that's ever been done before, and it is of huge scale. One of the things you need if you're going to take away cars, probably the last point I'll leave you with and then go to some questions, is mobility. So if you are going to try and build a framework for a city that has no cars, then you need to have the world's best mobility system from the get-go. And so I'll just take you through how this works. So there are currently 6 layers of mobility through the line. We start off with high-speed rail, general mass transit, vertical, elevated, and go through. I'll take you through each one of these. So what we end up with our high-speed rail. The high-speed rail station sits under here, buried underground. It's like Grand Central Station. It's a big terminal. This is our central terminal that feeds the city, and that connects up into the airports. That will connect up to NEOM International Airport and to NEOM Bay Airport, as also as our freight lines. But that becomes the high-speed rail, and you will be able to get, when finished, from here to NEOM International Airport within 25 minutes under the high speed. That's the high-speed connector, not dissimilar to other high-speed rail that you'll see around the world. Overlaying that, we put what's called a GMT, General Mass Transit. Again, they run beside the line, not under the line, they run beside it. And these stations are roughly every 1.5 kilometres to 2 kilometres. And they become your general mass transit. So if you want to go somewhere, you will drop down, get to a GMT and go to whatever station you need to go to along the line. And that becomes the second mode of transport. The third mode of transport is our rapid vertical transportation. These are not elevators, these are rapid transportation. These are massive cores that house massive goods and people mobility. They only stop at the primary decks, which I'll tell in a minute. One talks about, well, how can you go 500 metres? They're effectively taking you to the corners of each grid. And we've done all the modelling, and the time to move up and through the city still meets our 5-minute walk criteria. So the mobility and access and the network of all of this actually kind of comes together and stands up on all the modelling. We then have what's called our horizontal mobility. I talked before, this is about our primary deck. In this yellow line, you've got to think about inside all of that is all of your infrastructure. So in there will be light rail, and it won't be a heavy rail, it'll be done by magnet and all different types of things, but it is a loop system that loops around at height. So if you want to go somewhere, you literally walk to this deck, there's a train station, and you catch that light rail across and get off at any point, and they stop every 150 metres. It's just a light rail stop. That loops around, goes around in a circle. At this deck, all of the decks, they have a loop system. So you've got all sideways mobility inside the line, inside all of these primary decks. On top of the primary deck is the boulevard where all the public transportation, micro-mobility and everything works. We then add that micro-mobility that really sits on top. And as you can see here, we create bus lanes, pedestrian lanes, walk lanes, mixed with retail, mixed with residential, mixed with everything. And it becomes like any city boulevard, and it'll have landscapes, etc. that come through. And then finally, you have pedestrian. And then we've got pedestrian access. So it basically also goes crossways and through the city in terms of linking up both sideways and in between the primary decks. So all of those come together to form a network of mobility that has basically never been seen before in terms of this. If you looked at this as a grid and looked down at Manhattan, you would instinctively get this. And you'd say, absolutely, I get how this works. You've got, here's my Broadway, I can walk through that. Here's my streets, here's my subway, I get all of that. All we're doing is just putting it up in the air. And what happens is the minute we put it up in the air, everyone gets disorientated and says, well, that really doesn't work, but it does. It's actually a very logical and a very sane thing to do. So I'll just flip you through some of the CGIs. These are early CGIs, and what we haven't done, you've seen a sneak peek here, we haven't really released a lot of this information to the world. We will plan to do this in the next few months, but we want to basically be able to communicate that and educate the people in the world of what the line will be and why, and we'll have a lot more information than what I've presented today. But looking at some of the CGIs, you'll see the gate. This is massive. That's 350 metres in the air. That's the height of the Shard in London. And you can see the two canyons. The distance in here is roughly 100, 120 metres between the two, which is longer than a soccer pitch. So you think about it, you're sitting at one end of the soccer field, looking to the other end of the soccer field is the gap between that forms the canyon inside the line. And you'll see these things we call strings and sticks. And again, these are probably early CGIs, and we're working on more as the design of the assets develop. We have these for the 3D goggles that we have at the back. And the best way, it's really hard, we show static pictures. The best way to understand the lines, you've got to feel the line and you've got to feel the space. So if you've got time, put the 3Ds on. It's a beta, it's very early. We are working on a next layer of CGIs that enable people to get full immersion inside the line and be able to walk around inside the line. But basically, that's what we have a look at here. So that's, again, probably a lot of things. Just recap, the line is incredibly innovative. It challenges all of your norms. And it challenged my norm when I first came here, I can tell you. The first thing you think about is, well, that's crazy, that can't happen. Why are we doing this? Which is a great question. Why are you doing it? Which comes back to what His Royal Highness wants to do, which is to create a new way for cities to evolve, because we've been using the same model for thousands of years. And is there a new way? And there's no doubt that we will learn from what we're doing here, and that will be a learning think test for the rest of the world. And we're underway. We've done a lot of construction. We're pouring the foundations as we speak. Our timeline is pretty aggressive, but it is real, and it's an incredible place, and I look forward to sharing more information with you as we start to release it to the market. But I just wanted to give you some of the framework for today.